Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the COVID season in HAVPA survey. This, of course, is Mr. Horton, and today is Monday, April the 13th, and as well as finishing our spring break yesterday. I hope everyone had an excellent spring break and got some time to pull back, at least. And now we go forward to finish the year. How will we finish the year? Answer, I don't know how. Meaning that I don't know if you hopefully heard Mr. Turner's announcement this morning that this school year, indoors, non-traditional instruction, me talking to you like this, will continue to at least May 1st. He left the door open, however, for the possibility that that could continue further, meaning past May 1st to whenever. I don't know. So, ours is not the reason why, ours is but to do or die. Into the valley of death rode the 600 and the HAVPA survey class. So yes, we are beginning today on a new section called the Enlightenment. And I just sent you an email regarding this new section. And let me have a look at that. What I sent you. Yes, there it is. Today we're only going to have an introduction to this unit. I think it would be folly to throw too much at you. I've already given you, if you looked at the email, I've already given you this study guide that I'm now myself looking at. And I've given you 2 videos to look at. Look at those videos. They may seem like fluff and worthless, but trust me, there is a method to whatever it is I'm trying to do here, a method to my madness. And because we're broaching into a new era in studying of the arts, this enlightenment again. And like I said, we're only going to introduce this unit today. We're not going to go deep into the details, although I hope you noticed, if you read that email, that right now, tentatively, you have a test scheduled for Friday. Will we have that test Friday? To be honest, I don't think so. There's a lot of things I want to show you and a lot of things I want to talk to you about regarding the Enlightenment. We're getting into more of my favorite types of art, more preferred types of art now. The Enlightenment, which also includes classical music. Which, if you looked at those 2 video pieces, that's what it's about. It's classical music. And before I began teaching this class, I would be like the great majority of you, I imagine, that if you said the word classical music, I would look for the door and roll my eyes and say, oh, that's not for me. That's terrible. But in actuality, there's a reason why it's called classical music. And here's the reason. Classical music is called classical music because I think that most of you listen to music of some kind. I do. I think that most of you like a certain type of music, maybe several types of music. However, let me say this, that whatever kind of music you listen to, and be real honest right now, I could not tell you what is considered popular music. Yes, I'm that old. I'm that over the hill. I don't know. I would not imagine. And just as I guarantee that I probably would not like the music you listen to, I would not get the music you listen to. You probably wouldn't get or like the music that I listen to. But all that aside, know this, that the music that you listen to, like the music that I listen to, was inspired by somebody who was inspired by somebody who was inspired by somebody. And I could go on and on and on. And the roots of that inspiration would be traced back to classical music. Once again, something is called classical when it sets a standard that is so high that other types of art or architecture or design try to emulate it, try to replace it, try to do what they did, and they just can't. The classical music is the greatest of all time, and yet you might not understand classical music. And and it is something that you have to learn about in this class, and I'm not ashamed of that, and I make no apologies for that. Now, unfortunately, one of the things this COVID thing does is that it doesn't allow us to do what I used to do. Used to, in the good old days, back before we were all quarantined, I used to have my class take a test where they had to identify 25 classical pieces just by listening to the piece. About a 20-second part of a classical piece. They had to listen to it. Then they had to identify the name of the piece, name of the artist. We're not going to do that this year, but we are going to become acquainted with some pieces of classical music. And right now, make a mental note somewhere of this name, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I'll say it again. Most people just call him Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. We're going to learn a little bit about him. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, in my humble opinion, and I am not the only one that holds this opinion, was the greatest musician to have ever walked this planet. Now, how do you say that, Ms. Jordan? Because his intelligence capabilities for music exceeded anyone's who's ever came before him or ever came after. His ability not just to recreate music, meaning that he hears something and he plays it, but to create music is off the charts. And when I mean off the charts, he could do what mortal men could not do. And we'll talk more about this later, but for me, Wolfgang Mozart, his greatest ability, and this was documented, was that he would write music right out of his head. You say, what does that mean, Mr. Jordan? Well, I consider myself a writer. I write things, compose, like that email to you this morning that I wrote. I went back and deleted, wrote again, deleted, wrote again, several times. Mozart, when he would write not just pieces of music, but when he would write operas, and we've already talked about operas a little bit, An opera is a theatrical production where all of the parts are songs with music. But also in opera, you have songs with acting. You have action, choreography, dance. Mozart would create operas, and he would write out these operas, describe the operas, which includes singing of not one, but several people, singing at different levels, singing at different pitches at the same time, but also different musical instruments that'd be played at the same time, and also the different physical movements the actors were to do upon the stage. And he would just write that out in ink. And he never made copies of any of his works. And here's the thing, that when you look at his original copies, there are no scratches. In other words, he didn't say, oh, I could do this, would sound better like this, and go back and change it. It was said that it was as if Mozart was taking dictation from God and just writing. I mean, that is why Mozart was so incredible. So we're going to learn a lot more about Mozart because he is the GOAT, the greatest of all time musician. And so, but let's introduce this period. And that's what we'll do for today. So, forgive me. I'm looking right now at your study guide, which you should have. We're only going to begin with the introduction. So forward from the days that the Christian church had risen out of the ashes of the Roman Empire. I'm going to sneeze. You'll have to forgive me. Why shouldn't we be together? Why shouldn't we be together, boys and girls, during this COVID-19 thing? You just saw the answer. My sneezes are powerful and would spray droplets that you probably would not sense far across a room. And do I have the COVID virus? Probably not. But if I did, you would be a confined audience. But anyway, ever since the Christian church had risen out of the ashes of the Roman Empire, intelligent thought had always been under the strong influence and even stronger scrutiny of the edicts of Christian, you say, theology. What does that mean? It meant that in Europe, Western thought and what people thought was dictated pretty much by the Roman Catholic Church. It told you what to think. Now, while certain scholars dared to debate whether this earth operated according to the rules of God, or as they called it, natural law, something that we would call science, even though that the term science never really caught on until the latter part of the 19th century. For the most part, questioning of the authority of the Roman Catholic Church was a sure way to get yourself into trouble. I mean, you just didn't do it. And if the church said this is the way something happened, most people would just shake their heads and go about their business, even when the church was just so wrong. I mean, for example, and I'm off the subject here, Galileo Galilei, when he wrote his book talking about how planets revolve around the sun, the Roman Catholic Church made him recant, made him take it back, made him say in public, oh, I was wrong about that. And a stance for which the Roman Catholic Church did not actually say, sorry, until 1992. But anyway, so People went around teaching things contrary to the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. No matter how absurd those religious teachings might seem today, would often be labeled as witches, necromancers, and can end up getting burned at the stake. And, that did happen quite a bit. 160,000 women, estimate, were burned as witches for one reason or another. Beginning in the 17th, 18th, and into the 19th centuries, however, an intellectual movement began to take hold of the mainstream of society's intelligentsia, in which logic began to replace superstition. And the questioning of these long-held principles was not only allowed but encouraged. This period is referred to as the Enlightenment, and more specifically, the Age of Reason. The Age of Reason, test question coming here. The Age of Reason, I hope you're underlining that first paragraph, last sentence. The Age of Reason is said to have begun with the publication of Isaac Newton's theory of universal gravitation in 1687, and would end with the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. That will be on your test. Notice, the strength of this intellectual movement was that it finally provided a logical alternative to just blindly following the faith and superstition for the answer to life's questions. The weakness of the movement was that it attempted to apply science and logic and reason to everything, like science and logic and reason to fields like religion, to human experience, and to familiar relationships. For example, the cult of the supreme being, which we'll talk about later on, while intellectually inspired, was no replacement for the faith of millions of peasants in the God of their fathers. And now I'm going to tell you another thing. When we start looking at these Enlightenment thinkers, the Enlightenment thinkers, they, first of all, they couldn't agree on anything. I mean, just because they were members of the Enlightenment, they all had the different ideas. They all quarreled with each other, about what made the sun or what made the sun come up in the morning and things like that. But also this, and you don't read a lot about this in your history books. I know, when I'm talking about the Enlightenment, I imagine that probably a lot of you guys who've taken World Civ, taken American history, have learned about the Enlightenment as this intellectual movement. And, they talk in general terms. The Enlightenment was how people began talking about science, and people began using logic, and they quit using superstition so much. What they don't tell you is that these Enlightenment, and this will be on your test, these Enlightenment guys, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, Denis Diderot, Voltaire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They don't tell you that these guys looked for guidance to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Say again, that all those guys I've just mentioned looked for guidance to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, thinking that the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans were the last ones to actually use this kind of thinking. And they're right about that. However, these guys also looked to the ancient Greeks and Romans for guidance in making moral decisions. And this gets reflected in art and also in their behavior. For example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose name is mentioned on your test. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose entire thing that he writes about for his life is about being good. How when a person is born, he is born what is called tabula rasa. He is a blank slate. And that society then corrupts him. He is born pure, he is born good, and society makes him evil. And that all men should aspire to be good. Well, Jean-Jacques Rousseau had this disturbing habit of having sex with everything that moved. And worse than that, oftentimes these encounters would result in pregnancies of the women involved and children being born. I mean, such as to be expected when you do that sort of thing. Well, Jean-Jacques Rousseau would take the children and leave them at what were called foundling hospitals. Foundling hospital was a place where abandoned infants were left. And then Jean-Jacques Rousseau would go about and fertilize his next flower. And he did that a lot. He gained quite a reputation for doing that. But see, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim morality, of course, would condemn such things. But you got to remember that the thinkers of the Enlightenment had really divorced themselves from traditional Judeo-Christian Muslim morality. And that is just one example. One example. And we're going to talk more about that later. And so, yeah, we'll get around to it. Let us then begin. Let us then end for the day. I do, once again, I sent you this study guide. That's one. 2, we're supposed to have a test Friday. I doubt we will. I'll move it back, but I'll announce it on here. Send you an email, post it in Canvas. And 2, the videos. 1 from Elton John. And yeah, the Elton John video, it shows Elton John dressed up as Mozart, singing a song called Candle in the Wind. It's about the death of Marilyn Monroe. It's a beautiful song. But the part I wanted you to see is that Elton John, one of the greatest musicians of the last 50 years, and he was really, he started, his career really got kicked off in the 70s, of the last 50 years, he chose to imitate Mozart. Imitation is not, he's not mocking Mozart. It's a compliment. And the other one is one of my favorites, Clarence Berber's Adagio for Strings, a 8-minute piece that is played entirely on the cello. Cello is like a ginormous violin. And it's a very sad piece, and that's one of my favorites. There's a test question about that too. So please watch those videos. And so, yeah, I'm going to step back, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good day.